Today's video is going to cover the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission purchase contract. This is going to be the contract that you will use when you need to write an offer for your buyer who is ready to purchase a home. The very first page of this purchase contract is the acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures. This is actually a standalone form, and in the way that our contract is uploaded, it often shows as the very first page of the contract bundle. The very first line of this acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures, you simply enter the property address. As we go through this video, you're going to see notes in red text. Those are going to be just keynotes for you so that when you're actually writing your contract, you can use that as reference to know what you need to fill in those areas. So again, the very first thing you're going to fill in is going to be the property address on this top line. The next section of the acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures is pertaining specifically to the buyer. The very first portion is the buyer acknowledging that the broker has informed them of the duties and responsibilities that they are obligated to provide prior to them signing this contract. This first checkbox is only to be checked if the listing agent and the selling agent are located within the same brokerage. So for you as a Keller Williams Elite agent, that means that the co-op agent that you are working on the other side of the deal with could be in our Classen office or our Yukon office, our Lawton office, anything that falls under the umbrella of Keller Williams Elite. Now, there are lots of Keller Williams offices around the metro, and that does not matter. That does not count. It must specifically be Keller Williams Elite. So if you are doing a cross sale with anybody that falls under that umbrella, you must check this first checkbox that says applicable for in-house transactions. This is informing the buyer that our brokerage, Keller Williams Elite, is providing services to both sides of the transaction. The very next section is the buyer acknowledging receipt of some type of disclosure or disclaimer form. So as you can see, there are 4 options here: the property disclosure, the property disclaimer, the exemption, or there's no disclosure required based on the exemption or Residential Property Condition Disclosure Act. So when you go into the MLS and you download the attached disclosure, that will tell you which one of these you need to check to correspond with the appropriate attachment. The next section is the buyer acknowledging lead-based paint or lack thereof. So for properties built in 1978 or after, there is no lead-based paint. So we would simply select the second checkbox. If it was built prior to 1978, this contract must be accompanied by a lead-based paint form. And if it is not a residential dwelling, then you simply select the third checkbox that says it's exempt from this disclosure. The next section is that the buyer has received the estimated cost to buyer form. So this is where you're going to do your buyer cost sheet and present that to the buyer so they know what their estimated costs are going to be at the time of closing. This is also acknowledging that they have access to view the contract information booklet, which is provided to them on the OREC website. Now, important information here is when you're writing your buyer's name on the purchase contract, you want to make sure that we write this in the legal name that they are going to take title to the property. And this should match what their pre-approval says and what their identification says. So just please make sure that we're getting the correct buyer name. And you want to verify if they're going through financing, who is going to be on the loan, because they may be a married couple, but only one person is going to be on the loan. And therefore, only that person would be on the title. I'm sorry, that only that one person would be on the contract, but they would both be entitled if they are married in the state of Oklahoma. So if they are doing a loan and they're both on the loan, then they both need to be on the contract and they both will be on title. But if they are doing a loan and only one person is going to be on the loan, then only that person who is doing the loan will be on this document. But on title, we will have both of their names provided and they will both need to sign at the time of closing. So we just need to make sure we get the correct names, get a clear understanding of how they're doing their financing and if they're legally married, so we know how to address all of the documentation. So now we're through the buyer portion of the acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures. This next and very last section is regarding the seller. And this is the seller acknowledging that their agent has described to them their duties and responsibilities, and they're acknowledging that they have been informed of that. This next section, again, is the same exact as the checkbox earlier for the in-house transactions. So it's the seller acknowledging that they have been informed if the both agents in the transaction fall within the same brokerage. So if you've checked it above, it must be checked here as well. And this is only applicable if both agents fall under the Keller Williams Elite umbrella. This next section is the seller's confirmation that they have received their estimated cost sheet, which we call the estimated net to seller sheet, and that they have been given the information about where to find the contract information booklet on the OREC website. Now here, we're going to put in the seller's name, and the easiest way to find the seller's name is going to be through the realist tax record. And so I'm going to click to a realist tax record, and anytime you go to a realist tax record, you'll just be able to see at the very top where it says owner name, you'll be able to see who the owner of the property is at the very top there. And we're going to want to make sure that the name that we put here matches that name. So that is the extent of the acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures. Again, it is a standalone document, as you can see, page 1 of 1, but is often attached as the very first part of the purchase contract. Now we are going to hop into the actual purchase contract itself. Now, this is for a residential sale of an existing home. So this is not for new construction, but the new construction contract is very, very similar to this contract. Every single page of this contract will have the property address filled out at the very, very top. And so every single page, I'm not going to repeat that as we go through each page, but you will see the property address at the top of every page. Now, the very first section states that the contract is defined as this contract, all of the pages of this particular contract, plus any addendum that are selected in this next section. What that means is anything that you check in this next section must be attached as an accompanying document to this contract in order for the contract to be complete. Now, the items on the left-hand side are pertaining to financing, and then the items on the right-hand side are just additional supplements that may accompany a contract. And then there's a blank line in case you have an additional supplement that is not listed here. Okay, now, as you see, there is nothing noted here that says cash as far as financing is concerned. This contract is assumed to be cash as written. So if your buyer is paying cash for the home, you do not select anything here. You do not check mark and write in cash. You simply leave it blank. And as you can see, when we get down further on this page, it says that this contract is assumed cash unless a financing type is selected above. So please keep that in mind and do not make a check mark up here and write in the word cash. Okay, so if they're doing conventional loan, obviously you're going to check here and then attach the conventional loan financing. If they're doing FHA or VA, you'll check next to FHA or VA, attach that financing supplement, and so forth. Again, we're going to check and see if the house is in an HOA or if it's in a townhouse or condominium. If there's a contingency, we're going to select one of the two contingencies where it says sale of buyer's property. We'll check that if there is an applicable contingency. Again, if we check anything in this section, we must have an attachment that is sent along with this contract in order for the contract to be complete. Okay, the very next section is going to address the parties to the contract. And this is very simple. It carries over from the acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures. This should match the legal name of the seller that you found in Realist on the tax record. And then it should match the buyer name that you have verified that they're going to be using to purchase the home. The next section here, we're simply going to look up the county name of where the property is located, and that can be found on the county record, and that is right here at the top. It'll tell you what county the property is located in. And then next, it's asking you for the legal description, and we're going to pull that again from Realist. So in Realist, you'll see here where it says legal description, and some of them are going to be very long, some of them are going to be pretty short, but for the most part, we can just copy what is here and paste that over here in our legal description. If for some reason you're at a rural property and the legal description gets long, you can put C attachment and create an attachment to have the full legal description if it gets too long for that section, but that should be pretty rare. This next line is where you're going to actually enter the property address. So we're going to go back here and we're going to pull the property address. And again, you can pull that from Realist, but you should know what the property address is for the house that you are writing the offer on. And we're going to pull the full address. So make sure you put the property address, the city, and the zip code on there. The next section of this is talking about the money that will be offered. So this is where you will see it says this is a cash transaction unless a financing supplement is attached. Again, this is why we do not need to write in cash above if they are paying cash for the property. So if they're using financing, check the appropriate financing and move forward. Here is where we're going to write the price that they are offering for the property. So if they're offering $200,000 for the property, you simply write $200,000 in this blank where it says purchase price. This next section is talking about earnest money, which is in essence their good faith deposit that will be applied to the buyer's cost at closing as long as they proceed in good faith and close on the property. And so let's just say in this case, the earnest money is $2,000. So we're going to write $2,000 as the earnest money amount here where it says EM amount. The next section is going to be where do we want the earnest money held? Now your earnest money can be held at the title company that you're going to be closing the file at, or it can be held at our office here at Keller Williams Elite. It is up to your buyer and you to have that conversation of where you would like that held. So you can simply write the name of the title company there, or you can write Keller Williams Realty Elite there. Whatever that says is where that earnest money check needs to be made out to and delivered within 3 days of acceptance of this contract. Section 3 is going to discuss when this property will be closing and funding. So simply discuss with your client when an acceptable closing date would be and negotiate that with the sellers, and you are going to write that closing date in there. Moving on to page 2. So page 2 talks about the inclusions and exclusions. So these are things that are supposed to stay with the property or are supposed to be removed from the property. So section 4, letter A, are inclusions. So these are things that the buyer would like to request to be left behind with the property at no additional cost that should be leaving with the seller. And a good example of this would be if the buyer wants the refrigerator. We see that pretty common. The refrigerator in the state of Oklahoma is supposed to go with the seller, but we do see the buyer sometimes ask that the refrigerator be left. If the buyer wants the refrigerator, that must be noted in this section. Anything that is supposed to go and the buyer wants to request to stay should be noted in this section. Now, B is the opposite. That is anything that is supposed to stay that the buyer would like removed. A good example of this would be if there is a shed that they don't want to stay at the property, they want to be taken down and removed, or a play set that is out back that they want taken down and removed. Those would need to be written in section 4B, exclusions, things that should not remain with the property. Section 5 is regarding the time periods for when your inspections begin, and that's your investigation, inspection, and review period, as well as your financing period begins. Now, you can write a date in that section. It is my recommendation that you leave it blank because there is a default that is written into the contract that it starts after all parties have signed the contract. The reason I recommend that is because there could be some back and forth counter offers between buyer and seller. And if you write a date in there, we could lose days during that negotiation time. Whereas if you leave it blank, the clock doesn't start until all parties have agreed to the contract. So you don't unnecessarily lose days during that negotiation period. Now I'm going to jump down to 7. So in section 7, this is where we're talking about our inspections and investigations. All buyers have the right to do inspections on a property, and as agents, we should be recommending that they do so. We should also be helping them coordinate those inspections. During busy times, inspections can take a little while to get scheduled. So the contract defaults to 10 days. You may want to consider adding and changing that to 12 days or 14 days. I wouldn't, necessarily go out much further than that. It's a case-by-case basis, but you definitely want to leave yourself enough time to where you can get a good quality inspector to the property to do the inspections you need. You also need to take into consideration what all inspections will need to be done. Do we need a whole home inspection? Do we need a well or septic inspection? Do we need a structural inspection? Do we need a pool inspection? All of those have to be conducted during this review period. So just make sure that you can get all of those done in that window. Again, it defaults to 10 days from the time reference date. So just make sure you have enough time. Okay, so we're going to jump down into the next section that needs to be completed, and that's going to be the buyer expense section. Now here, this is going to be talking about the two different types of verification of title and making sure that we're transferring clear title to the buyers when they purchase the home. So they have the option to get title insurance on the property, or they can simply get the attorney's title opinion and not obtain title insurance. Now, we highly recommend that we always choose option one, which is getting the title attorney's opinion and obtaining title insurance. That way they are fully protected, that if anything pops up on the property later, that they cannot lose that property or have unexpected liens show up on that property that they would then become responsible for. Section C here is talking about the type of survey that is needed to determine appropriate easements, boundaries, and things like that on the property. In most cases, if we're dealing with standard properties and standard platted neighborhoods, we can simply use the mortgage inspection report option. If you're on a rural property or if the boundaries are unclear of where the property lines are, then you may want to consider doing a land or pin stake survey. Keep in mind, if we're doing those, that it is your responsibility as the agent to get that scheduled, whereas the title company does the mortgage inspection report, and those pin surveys do take some extra time. So if you are doing that, you may need to apply some extra days within the closing to account for making that happen. Now in section 12, that's the next section that you'll need to fill out. And this is regarding what they call residential service agreement or a home warranty. So there's a couple of options here. The first one is that the buyer does not want a home warranty. Number two is that the seller already has a home warranty in place and they are transferring that to the buyer with 1 year's worth of coverage. Or C, that the buyer wants a home warranty. So if we're choosing C, this is the only place that it gets tricky. So what we want to make sure is if we're choosing C, the buyer wants a home warranty and there's not one already in place. So we're going to say, yes, they want it. And then in the very first box here with the $sign, we are going to want to put in the cost of that warranty. So let's say the home warranty is $500. So we would put $500 in the first box. The second box is how much you're asking the seller to pay on behalf of the buyer. So that is completely up to you and the buyer in the negotiation of the contract. You can ask the seller to pay the full $500. You can ask them to pay half, the $250. You could ask them to pay nothing. But what you're going to want to do is make sure you write the appropriate amount in this next blank for how much you want the seller to contribute. So if you want them to pay the full amount, then you would have 500 in the first and 500 in the second. If they're paying half, it would be 500 and then 250. If you don't want them to pay for it, you just want the buyer to get one, then it would be 500 and 0. This next section, section 13, is additional provisions, and it's just an open text field where you can write in anything that you need to add to the contract, whether it's about termites or if you're using an escalation clause, or if you're wanting to make any other comments regarding the contract, you can use this open text field to make those notes there. Now, on this last page of the contract, we must have a date that our offer expires. Now, we want to make sure we give them enough time to present the offer to their client and get back to us without it expiring. But we don't want to give them too much time to where they can get a bunch of other offers unless they have set a multiple offer deadline. Then we want to adhere to that. So just make sure we're setting reasonable timelines for response. If it's not in a multiple offer situation, 5 p.m. the next business day is typically acceptable. But if there is a published multiple offer, all offers due by a specific date and time, then just make sure that you adhere to that when you put your termination time in the offer. Then you will have your buyers sign here on section 20 where it says execution by both parties. And then on the right-hand side, if the seller accepts your offer, that is where they will be signing the contract. And then the very bottom section is the associate information. So this is where you're going to put your name and your license number. Then I've included here the class in office information. If you're in our Yukon office, it's a little bit different, but this is the class in office information. So you just want to make sure you put in all of your information here. And if you want to be nice to the agent that you're working with or writing an offer on their listing, you can pull this information easily from the MLS and plug that information in there as well. So that is the run through of what needs to be completed in the purchase contract. So use this video to work on your case studies and use the template that was provided in your coaching booklet and get your case studies submitted. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us at any time. Good luck.